Some people don't just see, they see through. They walk into a room and feel every unspoken word, every hidden fear behind a smile. To them, silence is never empty. It's filled with meanings most can't bear to touch. And once you see the truth behind the laughter, you can never unsee it again. The colors fade a little. The world that once felt bright now hums with quiet ache, because understanding strips away illusion, and illusion was what made things comfortable. Wisdom, you realize, isn't light. It asks the weight of clarity pressing gently on your chest, reminding you that awareness is both a gift and a burden. The deeper you see, the lonelier it gets. And yet, somewhere inside that ache, something begins to awaken. There comes a moment in every thinking person's life when the surface of things begins to crack. You start to notice the little tremors, how laughter sounds rehearsed, how ambition feels hollow, how everyone is running, but no one knows why. The world still moves, glittering and loud, but somewhere inside, something in you has gone quiet. You begin to see the play, not a cruel play. Not even an intentional lie, just the great unconscious performance that keeps society from falling apart. The cheerful greetings at work, the perfectly curated smiles online, the polite small talk that fills the gaps where truth should live. You realize it's not just others wearing masks, it's you, too. You've spent years learning how to play the role you were assigned. The friend, the professional, the optimist, the achiever. You laughed when you were supposed to, nodded when needed, pretended to care about things that didn't stir your soul. It wasn't deception, it was survival, the way every actor must remember their lines to stay in the play. But one day, something shifts. You forget your lines. You catch the eye of another actor and realize they're just as tired as you are. And suddenly, everything that once felt normal now feels unbearably artificial. It's not that you despise people, you just see the machinery behind their emotions. You see how fear drives confidence, how loneliness hides behind love, how the need to be admired replaces the need to be real. You see that the world worships the image of happiness, not happiness itself. This new sight is both revelation and curse. You can no longer go back to sleep. You can't unknow what you now understand. The conversations that used to amuse you now sound like echoes in an empty hall. The music of everyday life, the gossip, the celebration, the striving, now carries a strange, off-key tone, as though the rhythm no longer fits your heartbeat. You stand in a room full of people and feel the strange dissonance of being awake among dreamers. You try to join in, to smile, to joke, to care again, but a quiet voice whispers beneath it all, "This isn't real." And that's when the pain begins. Because awareness doesn't simply open your eyes. It strips away your anesthesia. Every illusion you used to depend on begins to dissolve. The illusion of control, of permanence, of certainty. You start to see that everything people build, careers, identities, reputations, even relationships, rests on invisible threads that could snap at any moment. Wisdom shows you beauty, yes, but also fragility. You start to feel the impermanence in everything, the slow decay behind every moment of joy, the silence waiting beneath every word. You realize that what we call normal life is mostly a way to keep ourselves from hearing that silence. There is grief in this seeing. Grief for the person you used to be, the one who could still find comfort in ignorance. Grief for the laughter that once felt sincere. Grief for the world, which you now see trembling under the weight of its own pretending. Yet, paradoxically, within that grief lies a strange peace. Because when the mask falls, you meet reality as it is, raw, unfiltered, unpolished. You begin to sense something pure behind all the noise, a stillness that was always there, waiting. It doesn't promise happiness. It doesn't take away the ache. It simply whispers, "Now you see." And that whisper, that tiny flame of recognition, marks the true beginning of wisdom. For the first time, you are not just existing inside the play. You are aware of it. And that awareness, though heavy, is the first taste of freedom. When you begin to see too clearly, distance becomes inevitable. It's not a conscious choice. It's what happens when your inner frequency no longer matches the noise around you. At first, you try to hold on. You smile when people speak. You attend gatherings. You reply to messages. But something in you longer connects. The words that used to spark curiosity now echo hollow. The laughter that once comforted you now feels foreign. Like hearing your own voice on a recording, familiar, yet strangely unreal. You start withdrawing, quietly, gently, without a fight. Friends think you're tired. Family says you've changed. But you're not tired. You're done pretending. The small talk, the games of status and validation, the endless need to be seen, all of it dissolves into background static. You're not angry about it. You're simply no longer interested. You begin to crave silence the way others crave applause. Because in silence, you can finally breathe without performing. You can think without editing yourself. You can feel without having to translate it into something socially acceptable. The more awake you become, the lonelier it gets. Not because you hate people, but because so few are willing to step out of the play. They need the masks, the noise, the stories. You used to need them too. But now, illusion feels heavier than truth. And so, you start walking away from conversations that go nowhere. From relationships built on habit, from environments that drain more than they give. The withdrawal phase is not glamorous. It's quiet, empty, sometimes terrifying. There are days when you question everything, even your own clarity. You wonder if ignorance was a kind of mercy, because now you can see both the beauty and the sorrow in everything, and your heart, unguarded, absorbs it all. You notice the sadness in people's eyes when they laugh, the quiet desperation in the way they check their phones, the fear behind their confidence. You feel it all, deeply, not as judgment, but as empathy that has nowhere to go, and it hurts. The paradox of awareness is that it expands your compassion while shrinking your social world. You love humanity, yet you can hardly bear to be around it. The noise, the rush, the collective pretending, it all feels like static covering a symphony you can faintly hear beneath. You retreat not to escape others, but to remember yourself. Because somewhere between performing and surviving, you forgot the sound of your own soul. And now, all you want is to listen again. The world will call this withdrawal, depression, burnout, antisocial behavior. But you know it's none of those. It's purification. It's what happens when the mind begins shedding everything false, layer by layer, until only truth remains. In solitude, the noise finally fades. The silence that once scared you begins to feel sacred. You sit by the window, watching the city move below. Cars, lights, people, and you feel both inside and outside of it. It's a strange in-between. You belong to the world, but you're no longer of it. And then something shifts again. You realize that the pain of isolation is also the beginning of healing. Because in this quiet, stripped of roles and noise, you meet the one person you had long avoided yourself. You start to understand that your withdrawal isn't a disappearance. It's a return to authenticity, to stillness, to being. Awareness pulled you away from the crowd. Now solitude will teach you how to walk among them again, not as an actor, but as a witness. There is a quiet kind of death that happens when you leave the noise behind, the death of who you thought you were. In solitude, the ego dissolves one slow breath at a time. At first, it feels unbearable. The silence presses on you like a mountain. Find someone, fill the void, but you stay. And slowly, something changes. The silence stops feeling empty. It begins to breathe with you, not as an enemy, but as a teacher. You start to hear the subtle rhythm underneath everything, the ticking of your thoughts, the pulse in your veins, the soft hum of existence itself. For the first time, There's no performance, no mask, no audience, no applause, just you, and what's left when you stop trying to be anyone. In that stillness, pain begins to transform. It doesn't vanish, it unfolds. You trace it back to its roots and see that it was never punishment, only purification. All the sorrow, all the heaviness was the friction of truth rubbing against illusion. And when the illusion falls away, what remains is not despair, but clarity. You start to see beauty where you once saw emptiness. The quiet morning light feels sacred. Footsteps start to sound like reminders that the world is still breathing, with or without your noise. You stop needing to fix life. You start to feel it. This is not happiness, not yet. It's something deeper, peace without reason. It's what happens when you stop demanding that life be different and instead allow it to simply be. The walls you built for safety become transparent. The fears that defined you dissolve in observation. And through that transparency, you glimpse the truth. You were never broken. You were just buried beneath expectations, roles, and noise. Solitude is the cocoon where this metamorphosis takes place. A caterpillar does not rush its transformation. It dissolves completely before becoming the butterfly. Likewise, you must dissolve every identity, every belief, every name, until all that's left is awareness itself, and awareness is gentle. It does not judge. It watches clouds move, people pass, seasons change, knowing all is temporary and sacred in its impermanence. You begin to understand that nothing needs to be held, because nothing was ever lost. You cry for every version of yourself that tried so hard to be understood. You forgive the parts of you that couldn't see clearly, the ones that stayed asleep because they were afraid of light. And in that forgiveness, something reborn stirs inside, wordless, calm, unhurried. This is inner rebirth. The moment the pain that once defined you becomes the soil of your peace. The moment solitude stops being exile and becomes sanctuary. The moment you realize that awareness is not a wound, it's a window. And through that window, the world no longer looks false or broken. It looks tender, fragile, yes, but beautifully alive. You see that even in suffering, life has never stopped trying to teach you how to love more truthfully. So you sit there in your quiet room, sunlight spilling over your hands. There are no more questions, no answers either. Just the knowing that this simplicity, this breath, this silence is enough. And for the first time, wisdom no longer hurts. It hums softly within you, like music returning to its source. Wisdom is not a straight path. It bends, folds, and contradicts itself until you realize that every truth is only half of a larger circle. The deeper you go, the more you see that understanding is never about certainty. It's about holding opposites without breaking, because true wisdom lives inside paradox. And paradox is where the heart learns to bow before mystery. The more you know, the less you understand. In the beginning, knowledge feels like light, a tool to conquer darkness, okay? But soon you see that every light casts a shadow, and every answer opens 10 new questions. The wise don't speak of certainty. They speak of wonder. They've walked too far into infinity to pretend the horizon has an end. Ignorance says, I know. Wisdom whispers, I see, but I cannot name it. The world becomes both clearer and more mysterious at once. You no longer need to grasp, you simply observe. 2. The more you understand others, the less you want to change them. When your awareness deepens, judgment begins to fade. You start seeing not people's actions, but their pain beneath them. Anger hides fear. Control hides insecurity. Cruelty hides confusion. And you realize everyone is acting out of the same hunger, to be seen, to be safe, to be loved. So, instead of trying to fix others, you start to love them as they are. Not with indulgence, but with clarity, knowing that growth can't be forced. You stop trying to wake people up because you understand. No one wakes up by being shaken. They wake up when it's their time to dream differently. 3. The more you feel pain, the more compassion you carry. Pain used to feel like punishment. Now you see it as the thread that connects you to every soul that ever lived. Suffering cracks you open, and through that crack, empathy flows. You begin to sense that your tears are not just yours. They are the ocean's. The heart that has broken 1,000 times knows how to hold the world. This is why the awakened often seem tender, not because they are weak, but because they have felt everything and chosen to stay kind. For the deeper your truth, the fewer words you find. When you finally see, you stop trying to explain. Language feels too small, like trying to fit the sky into a jar. You realize that silence carries more truth than sermons ever could. In stillness, communication changes. A glance replaces paragraphs. Presence replaces persuasion. You no longer need to convince. You simply are. People feel it, not in your words, but in your energy. The wise don't teach through instruction. They teach by being impossible to ignore. 5. The closer you are to enlightenment, the more human you become. There's a myth that awakening means transcending the world. But real awakening brings you deeper into it. You still feel, cry, laugh, and stumble, but now you do it consciously. You stop chasing perfection and start living sincerity. The enlightened person still sweeps the floor, still forgets things, still loves, still bleeds. But behind every action, there's a quiet knowing. This, too, is divine. Heaven is not above. It's wherever you are fully present. Each of these paradoxes loosens another knot of the ego. Each reveals that truth is not a thing to possess, but a balance to live. And as you learn to hold opposites, joy and sorrow, clarity and confusion, love and detachment, you realize that wisdom is not about escaping duality, but dancing within it. When you stop needing the world to make sense, it finally does. When you stop fighting paradox, life stops fighting back. And somewhere in that still middle ground, between knowing and not knowing, between being and becoming, you find peace. A peace that doesn't explain itself. A peace that simply is. There comes a point on the path where you stop trying to escape the weight hand. Instead, you learn how to carry it gracefully. Wisdom doesn't make life easier. It makes you softer, more fluid, less breakable. You begin to realize that suffering wasn't in the seeing it, was in the resistance. The world hasn't changed. People still rush, still pretend, still cling to things that vanish like mist. But something in you has shifted. You no longer need the world to be different for you to feel peace. The noise continues, yet you stand at its center like still water. Awareness becomes your anchor, not your burden. You move through life differently now. You listen more, talk less. You laugh without reason. You allow imperfection to exist. Where once you fought to be understood, now you let understanding flow wordlessly. You've learned that not every truth must be spoken. Not every wound must be healed. Not every storm must be survived. Some are simply meant to be witnessed. This is the light touch, to act with intensity, but hold outcomes lightly. To love deeply, but without ownership. To live fully, but without attachment. You start to see that existence itself is a kind of divine improvisation, a dance between chaos and grace. You don't control the rhythm, but you can choose how you move. You can stumble beautifully, fail elegantly, fall consciously. And even falling becomes sacred when you stop calling it failure. You remember what the sages meant when they said, "Be in the world, but not of it." It was never about isolation. It was about likeness. To walk through life's fire without burning, because you no longer mistake the flame for the self. You learn to smile at paradox, to meet uncertainty like an old friend. Even pain becomes an old language, familiar, not frightening. It visits, teaches, leaves. You bow. You continue. In this state, love changes meaning. It's no longer a transaction or even an emotion. It becomes presence, the ability to sit beside another's chaos without trying to fix it. To say nothing, but be everything. That is how awareness expresses compassion silently, without the need to be noticed. Sometimes, people mistake your calm for indifference. They don't understand that it took 1,000 heartbreaks to become this gentle. It's not that you feel less, you feel everything, but now it passes through you like wind through reeds. You don't cling to pain, and you don't chase joy. You let both come and go, bowing to each as teacher. And somewhere along the way, you stop measuring life in terms of meaning or success. You stop needing to win the game, because you finally see there was never a scoreboard. Life isn't a test to be passed. It's a play to be experienced. And the goal was never to figure it out. It was to feel it fully. The light touch is not detachment. It's intimacy without control. It's loving the impermanent, knowing it will leave. It's smiling at uncertainty, knowing it's what keeps you alive. So you walk slower now. You listen more than you speak. You find beauty in small, quiet things, a breath, a leaf, a beam of light on the floor. The weight of knowing is still there, but it no longer crushes you. It grounds you like gravity does the earth. And one day, almost without noticing, you laugh. Not because something is funny, but because you finally see the joke of it all. How you try to control the river when all along you were the river. There comes a time when solitude no longer feels like a retreat. It feels like readiness. You begin to sense that the same world you once withdrew from is quietly inviting you back. But now you return with new eyes. You walk among people again, not to join the noise, but to move through it like wind through leaves. You still see the masks, the performances, the endless striving, but now, instead of judging, you smile. You understand the play, and you finally know your role, not as a prisoner of it, but as a conscious participant. The weight of knowing has turned into grace. You no longer use wisdom as armor. You wear it like sunlight, unseen, but warming everything you touch. When people speak, you listen not to their words, but to what they're trying to feel. When they hurt, you don't rush to fix them. You simply stay present, allowing their pain to exist without resistance. You've discovered that awareness itself is the most healing thing in the world. You move differently now. Your steps are slower, but each one feels deliberate, alive. You notice beauty in ordinary places, a flicker of light on a cup, the rhythm of footsteps on wet pavement, the quiet dignity in a stranger's face. Nothing is mundane anymore. Everything vibrates with the quiet hum of being. You've realized that the miracle isn't hidden in grand revelations. It's in the simple act of paying attention. You begin to engage with the world again, but from a new space, detached, yet compassionate, playful, yet profound. You treat life as a game, but not one to win, a game to dance through. Every challenge becomes an opportunity to practice the light touch. Every mistake becomes choreography. You don't force outcomes. You collaborate with them. You move like water, shaping yourself around each moment, letting joy and sorrow both sculpt you. You've stopped asking, "What is the meaning of life?" Instead, you ask, "How can I live this moment beautifully?" That question changes everything. It turns even routine into ritual. Sipping tea becomes prayer. Breathing becomes gratitude. Silence becomes music. You no longer seek enlightenment as a destination. You live it as a direction. And people start to notice. Not because you speak louder, but because your presence feels lighter. They sense peace around you, not perfection, but balance. You've become the border dweller, existing between the noise and the stillness, between human chaos and divine calm. You belong to both, and yet you're consumed by neither. You're no longer the observer or the actor. You are both at once, aware of the script, but free enough to improvise. This is what it means to play consciously, to laugh again, to love again, to build again, all while knowing that everything is temporary. You no longer fear endings. You trust the rhythm of beginnings. You can enter the world fully because you've stopped confusing impermanence with loss. So you walk back onto the stage, the same one you once left behind. The lights are still bright, the applause still meaningless. But now you don't perform for approval. You perform because creation itself is a sacred joy. You bow not for praise, but for gratitude, for having been allowed to play at all. And when the curtain falls, you don't grieve. You know that the play will go on, with other actors, other stories, other scenes. The consciousness that animates it all, the same one that looks through your eyes, never ends. It only shifts form, endlessly expressing itself. The weight of knowing no longer burdens you. It carries you. You have become both the player and the game, both the river and its flow. And in that effortless merging, life finally stops feeling like something you must understand and starts feeling like something you can love. In the end, there is no grand revelation, no blinding light, no sudden transcendence. There is only stillness, the quiet hum of understanding that fills the space where questions once screamed. You realize that wisdom was never about collecting truths, but about softening into them. It's not about mastering life, but about dancing with its uncertainty. The more you see, the gentler your gaze turns. The world hasn't changed. It's still the same stage it always was. People rushing, laughing, hurting, pretending, dreaming. But your eyes no longer cling to the play. They rest on the space between the scenes. You understand now that life's meaning doesn't live in its noise, but in its silences. Wisdom is not heavy anymore. It moves like breath, invisible but essential. It doesn't demand to be displayed. It simply shapes how you move through the world. You find eternity in the fleeting. You find God not in heavens above, but in the soft awareness that watches a leaf fall. You no longer seek to fix, to win, or to know. You seek to be, to experience life without the constant need to interpret it. To let joy arrive and leave freely, like sunlight slipping across a wall. To walk among illusions, yet remain transparent to yourself. Because how can you explain that truth is not something to learn, but something to remember? That the awakening wasn't a discovery, but a homecoming. You were only lost in the noise of forgetting. You look back at the journey, the illusions, the solitude, the paradoxes, the surrender, and see that every stage had its purpose. Every tear was a teacher, every silence a doorway, every ending a rehearsal for rebirth. It was the invitation to love more deeply, to see more clearly, to live more honestly. And now, standing at the threshold of nothing and everything, you bow, not to an audience, but to existence itself. The stage lights fade, the curtain falls, and for a moment there is only darkness. But you no longer fear the dark. You close your eyes and breathe. The story dissolves. The you that sought meaning dissolves with it. What remains is awareness, simple, quiet, infinite. Wisdom is not about knowing more. It's about carrying what you know with grace. That grace is the true gift of seeing. The love that doesn't cling or rescue or demand. The love that watches the world play, smiles softly, and whispers, all is well. And somewhere, beyond the noise and the names, the awakened one returns to the silence from which all things begin, the silent stage where nothing needs to be said, because everything has already been understood. Have you ever felt the weight of knowing, that quiet ache that comes when you see too clearly? The moment when innocence fades, and what's left is truth, naked and undeniable. Perhaps that weight has been following you, too, not to crush you, but to call you home. Because wisdom doesn't destroy, it transforms. It teaches you how to carry what you see with grace, how to love what is broken without needing to fix it, how to walk through the chaos without losing your stillness. So, ask yourself, what part of you is still resisting the truth? What illusion are you still protecting out of fear that life without it would be too heavy to bear? If these words found you at the right moment, stay, reflect. Share your story in the comments. Someone out there needs to hear it too. And remember, the silent stage is not here to teach, but to awaken. Because the truth cannot be taught, only remembered.